So, hey everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel. In this video, we will understand what is tight coupling and what is loose coupling in programming. So, it is a programming related term. So, it is not related to any language like Java, Python, or any specific language, but it is a programming related term. So, I will be explaining the concepts using Java, but same concept will be applicable for any other language as well. So without wasting any time, let's move into the folder. So first we will understand what is tight coupling. So from the term tight coupling, you might be getting some idea. So tight coupling means that the component of code will be dependent on another component of code. Here, for example, when we develop a project, we have a database like user database and that returns something like user details. So I have mocked a similar type of environment where I have taken a user database class, which is not exactly the database because if we set up the database and go for the example, then that will be quite complicated. So let us assume that this user database is our actual database and this is the database provider. And this provider has a method like get user details. So in the user manager class, we extract the user details from the database by using the database object. Because how can we extract the method of another class in any other class? So we have to declare the object of that particular class. Here we declare the object of user database class because user database class contains the get user info method. So that's why we have declared the object of user database in this user manager class. And then we have overrided that get user info in user manager and then called all that method. So this method name is get user info, that method name is get user details. So the method name is different, but we can also override that. So that is no big issue. So the main concept is that we have a database that is user database and we extract this user info in this user manager using the database object. So now we have a main method in tight coupling example. In the main method, we declare the user manager object and we simply call the user info method from the database and our program is running absolutely fine. So let me just run this and show you the output. And as you can see, get user details from database. So this is the output. Now imagine our database provider gets changed. Now we have user database as our database provider. Now suppose your manager comes and say that no, we have to change the database because that old database is outdated now. So we have to upgrade our database. So now we have to create a new class. Let me create a new class and that class name will be new user database. So now this new user database will be our database which will return our user info. So we will also copy and paste that method from the old database. So we will just copy and paste this method in the new database because the new database function is also going to be exactly same as the old one. So now we want this new database to do our operation. So let me modify it by adding a line that is user details from new database. So we want to fetch the user details from the new database. So now if I run that again, so you will see that we are getting the output again from the same old database. Why? Because our user manager is using the object of the old database. So that's why we have to change this user manager class as well. But take a moment and think, is it a good practice that when you want to add some new feature like changing the database, you have to change a user manager class? Suppose there is a huge project with hundreds and thousands of files and you have to change all the classes in there. So is that a good practice that to add just a simple feature like changing database, you have to refactor the whole code base? So that is not a good practice and that is not a good software development approach. So to accommodate the change in the database, we again have to use the method of declare the object of new user database. Then we have to then we have to call the method of get user details of this new user database and then our method will be running fine. So now let me run. Now I have declared the object of new user database and declared the object of new user database. So now our get user info in the user manager is extracting the information from the new database. So let me run the program again, and our user details are being fetched from new database, as you can see. So this is exactly what is tight coupling. So let me read out this notes or bullet points for you. So what is tight coupling? We directly fetch user details in user manager class by creating object of user database. So we are directly creating the object of another class in the user manager class. So there is a tight coupling between those two classes. That means those two classes are now tightly coupled. So when you do some changes in one class, you have to also refactor the another class. When there is a change in database provider, we have to refactor the user manager class to create the object of new database provider. So to accommodate one change, we have to refactor our code base, which is an example of tight coupling. So I hope you understood what is tight coupling. So now what is the solution for this problem? So that is going to be our loose coupling. So let me show you what is loose coupling. So in loose coupling, instead of having a class as a database provider, we are going to have a interface as our database provider. So this iUser database is our database provider, and this method that this database have gets user details. So this iUser database interface is going to be our abstraction for the database implementation class. So this iUser database is our kind of, you can say, it is an abstraction layer on the top of the actual implementation DB class. So let me show you the code, then you can understand it better. So now when we want that we want to implement this interface, we have to take a user database implementation IMPL. So this user database IMPL is nothing but a database provider. So that have to implement the iUser database, because the iUser database contains the main method or the method that we will use to return the user details. So this user database IMPL implements the interface, and then it overrides and return the user details from DB. Now, in the user manager, in the loose coupling, we will do something that will help us to avoid tight coupling. So this the point why we declared this interface over here will be cleared in the user manager. That why we declared this interface over here instead of a standalone class. So in the user manager, if you remember in the tight coupling user manager, let me open that file side by side so you can understand it a little bit better. So in the user manager of tight coupling, so in the user manager of tight coupling, you were creating the object of implementation database class. So you are directly creating the object of database provider in the user manager. So that's why both the classes were being tightly coupled. But in the loose coupling, we don't create the object of that particular implementation class. Rather, we use the reference of interface. As you can see, as you must know that interface are they cannot be instantiated, means they cannot have uh, objects of their own, so they take the objects of their implementation class under their reference. So this reference of interface iUser database cannot have a object created by using new keyword. If I write new iUser database over here, so I will get an error because I cannot do that, because interface cannot have objects of their own, because interface cannot be instantiated. So when I click that, it basically created a anonymous inner class. So that is also a process of instantiation of interface. So when we try to instantiate this iUser database reference, we will instantiate it using the child class of it. So what is the child class of it? The child class is this user database IMPL, which implements the interface and overrides the method. So in the constructor of user manager, we passed the object of the base implementation class that we have to have in our project, that we want to use in our project. So we want to use this user database IMPL provider in our project. So we will pass this method or this object in the constructor. It will get clearer when we go to this loose coupling example, but As of now, just try to bear with me for this user manager of the loose coupling. So using that instantiation, we call the get user details from database using the reference of interface, not the reference of the direct implementation class. Getting my point? So when we change the database tomorrow, so this code will not have to be changed because this iUser database will be passed with a different class object over here. So we don't have to change this class. So getting my point? So we are calling the get user details method from DB using the reference of interface, not class. Our interface is going to be permanent and no change will be done to that interface. So let me go to loose coupling example class. So this is the loose coupling example class. So let me comment this line over here so you can understand what's going on over here. So in loose coupling class, first of all, we have to create the user manager object like we were doing in the tight coupling example. We were creating the in the tight coupling example. Let me open that file. In the yes, here it is. In the tight coupling example, we were creating the object of user manager because user manager is extracting the information from DB by calling that method of DB. So in the loose coupling also, we are doing the same thing by calling the user manager object. So where is that? Let me open that loose coupling example. So let me open from here. So in the loose coupling example, we have to declare the object of user manager. But as you know, user manager in the loose coupling, it does not have a default constructor. It has a parameterized constructor. So in the parameterized constructor, we have to pass the reference of the interface. And we cannot pass a null reference as the parameter because when we pass null reference, then we will get some error over here because we are trying to assign a null reference to another null reference. So we have to instantiate the interface reference, then pass it as a parameter. So let me show you. So we have to instantiate, let me write a comment line, instantiate the reference of interface. Then interface. So how can we instantiate the reference of interface? By the help of its implementation class. So we have used the implementation class user database IMPL over here. So we instantiate the reference of interface using the object of the implementation class. Now we just have to create the object of user manager, create the object of user manager to call the method so that we can call this user manager dot get user info method. So when we create the object of user manager in the parameter of the constructor, we have to pass this reference instantiated with its implementation class. So when we call this user manager dot get user info, the control moves to this line. So when the object of user manager is created, this iUser database reference over here in this class is instantiated with the user database IMPL object. So when this particular method is called using the reference of interface, so basically it calls the method of user database IMPL. Getting my point? Because this reference is being instantiated with this implementation class object. So when we try to call the method with that particular reference, so we will obviously extract the details from this particular implementation class. So it is actually very simple. So it may sound complicated, but when you write the code by yourself by watching the video 2 3 times, you will understand the thing better. So at last, I will also give a summary over here. So before that, you need to understand what is going on. So it's actually good that if you are getting confused because it is a tricky concept. So you may get a little bit confused, but everything will get clearer and clearer when we create more such object or more such classes of implementation. So when we will do like 2 3 times, you will understand the thing in a better way. So now we have this user database IMPL class, which is the implementation class that is being instantiated in the reference of interface. Then this interface reference is being assigned to this object of implementation class in user manager. Then using that object of user manager containing the reference of interface, which moreover contains the object of implementation class. We are calling this method. So I hope the point is clear. Now let's move to the next part. So let let us consider the similar situation over here. Let's say your manager comes again and says you that no, we have to change this user database IMPL provider because it is outdated or there is some problem. So we have to use some new user database IMPL. We are going to change the database provider. So how can we do that? In the tight coupling, as we have seen, when we add a new user database provider, so there was a tight coupling issue. For that, we have to change the user manager as well. But here you will see the magic of loose coupling. Like how if we also add a new database provider, that we don't have to change the user manager anymore. So here you will see the actual magic of loose coupling. So let me open the new user database IMPL. So it is also implementation class below the interface. Like the interface is present on top of this implementation class. So any implementation class or database provider that we want to use, so they are bound to implement the interface or they are bound to abstract below the interface. So this is also going to do exactly same like get user details. And here I return the line fetched user details from DB. From let me write get user details from new DB so that you can understand what's going on. So this is new user database IMPL, which is our new database provider. Now, if I just move to the loose coupling example in the main method, now I have to create the reference of our interface because we are instantiating the reference of interface by the help of its implementation class. So let me again write that comment line over here. So instantiate the reference of interface by the help of its implementation class. So our implementation class is changed. So now we have new user database IMPL as our implementation class instead of user database IMPL. So now again create the object of user manager. Create the object of user manager. Let me copy paste it over here. So create the object of user manager. Then simply call the method of user to get the user info using user manager object. So let me run this code over here. So when we run this, see what we get in the output. Fetched user details from new DB. Do we have to refactor the user manager over here? No, right? So that is the magic of loose coupling. So when we use loose coupling, we don't have to refactor any other code in our code base because the components of our code are loosely coupled. They are not dependent on each other. There is a layer of abstraction over the implementation classes. So that is helping us to avoid tight coupling. So in the user manager, if I go to user manager in the loose coupling, here we are again declaring the interface reference. Now when we pass the constructor, when we declare this object of user manager and in constructor, we pass the object of this new database user IMPL. So when we pass this object of new database user IMPL, so that means our code is referring to the new database IMPL rather than the old one. So I hope you are getting my point. So this interface reference is basically doing the job of abstraction. That means it will take any of its implementation class, no matter which one is it, and return the result according to that. So when we want to change the database, we just have to add an implementation class to the interface, which implements the interface, then use the object of that particular implementation class to get the output. So I hope I'm making things clearer for you. So let me read out this notes. So in loose coupling, we don't fetch user details in user manager by creating the object of implementation class. So we don't create the object of implementation class. Rather, we create the reference of interface. Then the interface, we are assigning the objects of implementation class through a parameterized constructor. So rather we declare the reference of base interface. So that is this one. So the reference of base interface is this one over here. So when we declare the reference of base interface and instantiated with reference with required provider class object. So we instantiate that particular reference with the required provider class. So in the starting, we were using this user database IMPL. Then at last, we changed it to new database IMPL. So these are provider classes. So the object will be created according to the, or the method will be called according to the provider classes. So where we have to pass this provider class object within the parameterized class of parameterized constructor of user manager. Then using the reference of interface, we call the method to fetch user details from the DB. So using the reference of interface, let me write something over here, which now is instantiated with required provider class object. So using that reference that is now instantiated with required provider class object, we call the required method to fetch the user details from the DB. So instead of calling the directly through provider class object, we call indirectly through base interface reference instantiated with required provider class object. So when we change the DB provider to something else, then we just need to pass that class object as a reference in parameterized constructor of user manager. So when we change the DB provider to something else, then we need to pass that class object as a reference in this parameterized constructor of new user manager class. So that means that our method or our project will be working under this new database provider. So that means we don't have to refactor user manager class again and again to accommodate changes. So this is like a summary. So this is a summary. Basically, the interface acts as a layer of abstraction, which is on top of every implementation classes. The implementation classes are nothing but database providers. So we use the reference of interface instantiated with the object of required provider class to get the desired output. So I hope you understand the logic and the concept that are being explained in this video. And this is a very fundamental aspect of programming, tight coupling and loose coupling. So earlier there was tight coupling, which used to cause many problems for developer. So that's why loose coupling came into the scene, and many of the frameworks in today's time, like Spring, is created to avoid this loose coupling. So the fundamental purpose of creating Spring framework was to avoid tight coupling. So the Spring framework provides an abstraction over the implementation classes, which helps us to achieve loose coupling. So in short, tight coupling is something that couples the classes within the projects tightly so that when you change something in one file, you have to refactor the coupled files or other code base in the system. But if we are using the loose coupling, when we change some file, then we don't have to refactor any other part of our code base. So that is overall summary of the tight coupling and loose coupling. So I hope you understood the concept that I was trying to explain. So if you like this video or any of our previous video and you want me to keep creating this type of videos explaining different concepts of programming and backend concepts from Spring Boot or DSA videos, you can subscribe the channel and comment what you want from me or what you want uh, from me what you want me to create and upload on this channel. So that's it for this video. Till then, keep learning. Thank you.